are the real way we have to make a transition to a green economy. Because an economy based on fossil fuels leaves people redundant. I was broken-hearted this morning to see that one of the world's biggest agriculture equipment makers, Caterpillar, is buying up one of the biggest makers of mining equipment. And they're betting on increase in profits. They're betting on the fact that in the next 10 years, mining companies will each, like BHP Billiton or other companies, will have surpluses of 70 billion. Why? Because this crazy economic collapse we saw in 2008 in Wall Street has led all the investment moving into commodities. One side is food transformed to a commodity, so prices of food keep rising. But high prices of food means more hungry people. Also, people who are mining coal, people who are mining iron ore, people who are mining bauxite are having a field day. The head of Caterpillar saying, we are going to invest in everything, in copper, iron ore, everything that comes out of the ground. Now, I believe nature put things underground because she wanted to leave them there. You know, fossil fuels were made underground, so they stay. And, there's some very, very intelligent governments like Ecuador, which has decided they're going to leave their oil underground. They're going to allow the Amazon forest to perform its ecological functions and not destroy it for a few decades of mining. We've achieved a very, very important victory in India, where in August of this year, we were able to convince the government that the bauxite left in this mountain called the Sacred Mountain that upholds universal law, the mountain's name is Niyamgiri, were able to convince the government on the basis of a very long struggle by the local tribals called the Dongriya Khond, that the role of the bauxite provides a higher economic value if left in the mountain than if extracted out of the mountain. Now, you've seen those images of Hungary. Remember the red mud sludge that killed, I think about 9 people were killed and thousands have been evacuated? When you see that red mud, you don't connect it to the glittering aluminium that is all over in our infrastructure. That red mud is created as the waste of aluminium manufacture. For 1 ton of aluminium, 1 ton of waste is created. So if a factory is making 1 million tons, it's accumulating 1 million tons of waste, and they keep making these ponds, hoping they're going to stay intact, but like the leak showed in Hungary, they don't. For every ton of aluminium, 1,700 gallons of water is used. Entire rivers get rerouted. It takes 1.5 gallons of gasoline. The energy uses 135,000 kilowatt tons of energy, which emits 13.1 tons of carbon dioxide. We are talking about such a huge ecological footprint. And the reason aluminium is considered efficient is because that footprint isn't counted in the costs. It's the tribals who pay the costs. It's the people who were killed by the red mud sludge who pay the costs. So externality is a vital part of the old paradigm. You make the profits and you leave all the costs to society. In a Green Deal, you have to internalize every cost. And the only way to internalize costs is to treat production as a social good. Because once you privatize gain and socialize costs, you will have super profits for corporations and increasing unemployment burden and environment burden for society. We are seeing those who would continue this old paradigm trying their best to not allow a shift to happen. A shift that is staring us in the eyes because of the multiple crises we face. The crisis of climate, the crisis of the financial collapse, and with it all the economic collapse. Who would have imagined 2 years ago a Europe where countries would need bailout? Who would have imagined that the European Union would not create a common security for Greece and Spain and Ireland and Portugal? But they are in a worse situation today than third world countries. And I get letters from activists in these countries, saying, writing from a world that is unraveling, writing from a world in collapse. And then they write about wanting to come to India to learn how to live sustainably, to visit our farm, the school, and the school I have started called the School of the Seed, on how to live with less, but at a higher level, without the kind of securities that were guaranteed, for example, in Europe by the welfare state. Now, when fossil fuels started to run out, and peaking of oil is the signal, an intelligent society would have said, enough is enough, we shift to a renewable economy. But what did the unintelligent response include? It said, let's squeeze out fossil fuels wherever they are. We'll go into the ocean and then we'll create a BP spill, which has cost $40 billion in the Gulf of Mexico. We'll go to the tar sands of Canada and try and squeeze out oil from the tar. We will blast every rock. President Obama has just been to India to offer this for American jobs. He came begging for 50,000 jobs for America. He came to poor India. Now, the point is, India is still poor, even though we have 9% growth, but that growth isn't for the people of the country. And he said he is going to send his companies to do fracking in the Ganges basin. In fracking, what they basically do is push water and chemicals with very high pressure to push oil and gas out of little spaces in the rocks. In energy terms, it's highly inefficient. In water terms, it's very polluting. In America, they tell me, in areas where this fracking has happened, when people turn on their taps, the taps of water are catching fire because the gas and oil and the water are all mixed now. Now, that kind of disaster they would like to make on every inch of the planet. The diversion of food to fossil fuels or replacement of fossil fuels, the biofuel issue. Again, today's newspaper has record US ethanol exports raise question about tax credits. $8.4 billion is the support given to make an unviable source of oil viable. It takes 1.5 gallons of gasoline or fossil fuel to produce 1 gallon of ethanol. You use more fossil fuels than you substitute. It's a negative energy equation. And it wouldn't work if there wasn't that $8 billion subsidy. In the US, they had till 2006, diverted 20% of the corn to ethanol and only replaced 1% oil, 1% petrol. If they were to replace put all the corn to make ethanol, they'd only replace 7%, which means 93% would have to be gotten from other sources, which is why they must go to Indonesia, why they must go into the Amazon, why they must go into Argentina. And one other aspect of President Obama's recent visit was requesting India to join hands to go to Africa. To go to Africa, both for biofuel and what he calls the new model of food security, which is the old model of food insecurity, because it doesn't produce more food per unit acre. Now, because of this huge diversion of food into fuel, in 2008, 75% of the price rise was assigned to this diversion by the World Bank. That the price rise was because of the diversion of food to fuel. And we have seen this year a 15% blending, which means 40% of the corn is now being used for biofuel in America. And 70% goes to cattle feed. So how can America claim to be a food surplus country? Most of its food is being used either by cars or being used to torture animals who don't want to eat grain, they like to eat grass. If you'd only asked them, they'd have said, give me grass. They're now talking about second generation biofuels. And this is very interesting. At this point, about 24% of the world's biomass, all the green cover, is commodified, largely in terms of food commodities, and a little bit now with biofuel. Industry would like to commoditize the last leaf that becomes organic matter in the forest, the last bit of straw that goes into composting to make the soil and feed the soil organisms and give us food in the long run. They would like to leave nothing for ecology and ecosystem services and leave nothing for human beings. And they call whatever is used in nature's economy and whatever is used in the social economy as waste, because it's not generating growth, because growth is only commercial transactions. Now, when a forest is very, very rich in biodiversity, it's thriving, it's growing, that growth of the forest doesn't contribute to economic growth. But you kill the forest, turn it into timber, you have growth. If a river runs and is nourishing people all along the river course, it doesn't contribute to growth. You dam it up, you sell its water, you suddenly have growth. So, in fact, economic growth is related to the death of nature and the death of a local green economy. And a New Deal would require redefining growth so that it is based on the growth in nature, the growth of forests, the growth of our rivers, the growth of our soils, and the growth in society, the growth of our children. I mean, isn't it amazing that Italy is not able to reproduce itself as a society? There aren't enough children being born in this country. Now, human beings have never had that problem before. You know, you always reproduce yourself as a society and a culture. Or people always worry about too many children, but I believe the problem of too many children and too few children is the same problem, and both are rooted in a non-sustainable economy. Both are rooted in not having access to the resources that you need to live in security and have the future generations grow up in their own security. We now have a convergence of what is a biological imperialism over the planet. BP, Shell, Total, Exxon, Cargill, the world's biggest grain trader, ADM, one of the big 5 grain traders, DuPont, Syngenta, the big gene giants, chemical giants that control the seed, along with Monsanto, Weyerhaeuser, which controls forests, have all become one unified group. One group to extract the last bit of biomass out of nature and out of people. It's that biomass in which my sisters live, to bring firewood to cook their meals. And if the corporations had their way, there'd be no firewood, there'd be no food. There would be no fiber in the hands of people. So a green economy must, by necessity, be an economy for nature and people. That's where the New Deal has to be made. And nature and people are the two who are constantly left out of an old paradigm that was wrong in ignoring nature and people in the first hand, but also wrong in reducing economy to finance and treating finance, which is a fictitious construct, as the only measure of wealth. Today, there are $3 trillion of financial capital moving around the planet, and this is 70 times more than the real goods and services that are produced by human society. And that's why you notice at the G20 just now in Seoul, they were having currency wars, because the issue of currency has now become so important in these transactions.